Thank you for joining CAISE and Exploratorium for the GENIAL Summer Results webinar. This webinar will be recorded and registrants will be receiving a link by email afterwards. So we're going to start with an introduction of the Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education by co-principal investigator Kevin Crowley from the University of Pittsburgh.
The Center for the Advancement of Informal Science Education is an NSF-funded center that is charged with providing web infrastructure, resources, and connectivity for those working in informal STEM education and science communication, including practitioners, researchers, evaluators, and other stakeholders. And so this is part of our mission today, helping an ASIL-funded project bring together, convene, and share lessons from what they're learning. And just briefly, CAISE has a couple of related things we're working on I just want to tell you about. We have task forces focusing on broadening participation in STEM education as well as evaluation and measurement. The Broadening Participation Task Force is currently developing a framework, practice briefs, and diagnostic tools that institutions can use to connect their work more with broadening participation, the way NSF defines it. And we're also in the Evaluation and Measurement Task Force of CAISE doing a project right now that looks at identity, the role of identity in informal STEM learning, and developing some tools and resources that help people integrate identity into their evaluation work. So Ashley, if you could maybe post in the notes a link to the Broadening Participation Task Force article in the newsletter. People might want to look at that after the webinar. But that was my welcome, and so now I turn it back to Ashley, who will kick off the webinar.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this presentation over to the GENIAL team at the Exploratorium.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so excited to have all of you today. We've been working on this project for a while, and it's very exciting to share at this point the GENIAL Summit findings with you all, and also to have a more in-depth discussion with you. I just want to remind folks, if when you registered, we sent you a link to a Google Doc that's very important for the webinar. If you haven't had a chance to print that out, or maybe if you can just access it, click on the link and maybe pull that up for you, because we'll be using that in the second part of our discussion section. And so it'll be important for the conversation. So hopefully you've had a chance to make that accessible to you. Okay, oh, next slide, please, Amy. So I just want to quickly introduce the GENIAL Exploratorium team. We have as the PI, Dr. Isabel Hawkins, who is a project director here and an astronomer. She unfortunately could not be with us today, but I assure you she's here in spirit. And if you know, in dance, she's a salsa champion dancer, so she is with us today in that way. And she is a PI on this project. I am the co-PI. My name is Veronica Garcia Luis. I'm a project director here in Visitor Research and Evaluation, and I also am head of the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative here. I also would like to introduce Liliana Blanco, who's Administrative Director at the Exploratorium for Mediated Experiences, and Amy Oates, who's project staff as well, and project coordinator, who really has made a lot of the magic happen in a lot of the organization around this project. This has been quite an endeavor for us. So I'm going to turn it over to Lily, who'll tell you a little bit more about our agenda today.
Great. So we have two goals for today's webinar. The first is to disseminate the GENIAL summer results, and the second is to build on the conversations that were started at the summit and continued by our advisors through the publishing of their articles. And we want to facilitate GENIAL participants, the project team, advisors, being able to connect with each other. And as you can see by the agenda, we value dialogue being at the center of the participant experience at the summit, and we wanted to carry that over to the webinar. And so today's agenda is a short presentation by the project team, followed by us breaking up into virtual smaller groups for discussions as we process and engage in the questions that we're posing for us today. We wanted to give you a little bit of context around how the summit project goals were developed. A couple years ago, when the Latino Coordinating Committee was thinking about how to expand our work, we started to talk to colleagues and some of our advisors, and we realized that the field hadn't really convened since the last 2009 NSF-funded conference titled Expanding Informal Science Education for Latinos. And so we envisioned a summit where our questions and folks' questions around the country that are doing this kind of work could be brought into a space where we could connect with each other, identify opportunities and needs, and further develop those questions to better inform the field. And so Amy's going to tell you a little bit about the summit itself.
So yes, last June, we brought together 91 participants from across the US and Puerto Rico. And as Lily said, it was important to us that this wasn't just a conference where people heard and sat back, but that we really wanted people to engage with one another and have provocative conversations that really could push us all forward. And it was also very important to us that we brought together people who represented a variety of different disciplines and fields so that our conversations brought together different perspectives. So we would start with panel presentations, but then we would break out into discussion groups. And prior to the summit, we worked with an advisory group of strand leaders to identify different strands to frame all of the content of the summit. And then our strand leaders identified different people who were thinking about and working within those different strands. And they invited panelists. And so the strand leaders and panelists worked together to come up with big ideas along each strand. And you can see Latino audiences was led by Cecilia Garibay and Veronica Garcia Luis. Marketing, communications, and media was led by Lorraine Iglesias and Julie Nunn. Community collaboration and empowerment was led by Salvador Acevedo and Paul Dusenberry. Organizational change was led by Laura Huerta Maigas. And relevant STEAM experiences was led by Cheryl Lani Juarez and Veronica Nunez. And after the summit, as Lily mentioned, the strand leaders and some of the panelists collaborated to write thought articles along each strand, which you can find on our website. And then for our team, following the summit, we worked very closely with a documentation specialist to identify emerging ideas and themes that came out of all of the strands. And you can see here a list of these different ideas. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Veronica, who's going to really unpack how we took these themes and made them into actionable insights. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Veronica.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm just going to pull up some of my notes here. Okay, so we had 6 actionable insights that emerged from the summit, and also upon reflection and synthesis from the strand leaders, the panelists. They also created a series of articles and documents that you can find on the website around each of the strands and themes. So what I'm going to represent right now is the ideas coming from that synthesis of the summaries, the articles, and I'm doing it kind of at a highlight level. So then that way, hopefully that piques enough of your interest so that when we get into the dialogues, you can use this as reference point. So the first one is co-create STEAM experiences with and as opposed to for Latino communities. So this is really about co-creating activities and initiatives with Latino communities is a natural extension of engaging Latino audiences in STEAM. A key goal of co-creation is to connect the content with experiences, values, and interests of the community. So co-creation is important to ISL institutions because it helps reduce some of these power imbalances by eliminating the idea of us and them. And so moreover, institutions are working together with their communities in order to achieve these the greatest change in partnering in this way. Co-creation has some fundamental core values, which is based around understanding, respect, trust, building relationships, and also sharing power. Sharing power is kind of a newer idea that's part of the co-creation. And so this model acknowledges and recognizes that culture is an asset to be leveraged by the community or communities and not to be left at the door, as this quote that Antonia Franco left us with as part of the summit really shows. And so really what we're doing is we're bringing our whole selves, and we're asking the community to do that as well in co-creating these experiences. Some key highlights around this is that, you know, one size does not fit all. We need to get more nuance and have a better understanding about that with our communities, and creating just one experience doesn't, you know, mean that you have to have this template that you're working with either. So we really need to change that approach and to be open to non-traditional partnerships or opportunities, and also to think more long-term with the partnerships and the connections that we're making with the communities as well. In the summit, often it came up that people were saying that, you know, no more one-off experiences. The community is tiring of that, and it's not having an impact. And lastly, just these co-creating models and approaches is really a way to start to build an ecosystem of learning and support. So the next actionable item is spend time and resources understanding Latino communities and identities. And we're excited. We have Cecilia Garibay and I think maybe Patricia Lanes also on the CAISE webinar. They led, Cecilia led this strand, and I'm drawing heavily from the work here that I'll be sharing with you right now from the paper. And so really, when we talk about understanding Latino communities, the field often just looks at demographics. And although that is helpful, but we really need to start thinking about going way beyond that and having a more nuanced understanding of the communities. And this insight is really about flipping that frame and going beyond the demographics. So it is essential to understand the complexity and diversity of Latino audiences for authentic engagement in any field, including informal science learning. And here there were 4 key ideas that served as foundations for considering Latino audience. One is identity and culture. Second was amplification. Third was decolonization. And fourth was risk-taking. And what's important is that the content of these ideas speaks to the need to shift from simplistic viewpoints to more holistic perspectives, and that really acknowledge culture as dynamic and fluid, and that it really views audiences in more complex ways that really reflect on these intersections of identity and experiences. And it is also a way for us to engage in deeper practices and building our own cultural competencies as well. Just to say a little bit more about these 4, identity is personal and not prescribed. We in ISL institutions should really work to understand community identities as nuanced, unique, varied, non-homogeneous, and we need to allocate these resources to really understanding. And then around amplification, not simplification. So to simplify culture is reductive. Amplification steps outside the assumption frame and acknowledges that culture and identity are assets in authentically building relationships and experiences. And then decolonization is really co-created rather than appropriated, which the first action item really shows. And then the fourth thing is risk-taking. And risk-taking was covered a lot at the summit in different ways. And really what the spirit of it was to really go beyond best practices and to really shift and try to innovate our own practices and try different things and be more comfortable with failure, and really to really kind of be able to take our practice to a different level. The third actionable item was the use for data and that for use data for analysis, reflection, and action in conjunction with community dialogue. So data, especially in our day and age now, we're very data rich and saturated. And what really emerged from the summit was really that all the different ways we can be using data to inform our work. So data within marketing, data to make business case for new work and directions, data and resulting interpretation, data to learn more about communities. So data basically sets us up to be able to be resource and to advocate for risks and new ventures and moving the needle within our organizations. So while data does allow us to advocate for new directions, just like co-creation and empower sharing piece of this work, data must be interpreted with and not just about the audiences and the communities. So this means going back to the Latino audiences and looking at the data together and having them be partners in the interpretation around it. And that is one way to avoid generalizing and also homogenizing groups as well. Okay. So the next actionable insight is really about cultivating ownership of the work across every function of ISL organization to break down barriers and prevent assigning diversity work to only a few staff. This was an interesting insight because it really shows that no matter where you are in terms of your own organization, you are able, folks should be empowered to be doing this work at different levels. And in fact, it's important to be able to think as your role, to be able to lead from where you are in your institution. Now, what's also very important to acknowledge is that there needs to be commitment from leadership of the efforts and initiatives. So their voices and actions also need to be represented in the institution's work, which puts us on this path to really organizational change. So some of the things to consider is around the audience engagement framework that affects the entire organization around structures, priorities, and can also be more effective than simply assigning outreach or to particular individuals and programs within the department. And so really some of the key questions here that I think are important for us to think about as a field is, do I assume that this work belongs to one person or a team? Sorry, sorry, I was just checking the chat to see if I didn't miss something. And also to assume that do I assume that this work belongs to one person or a team? Do I assume that I'm unable to do this work? Or do I assume that giving power means losing power? Do I assume that I need additional resources? And also, do I know who my allies are in this work? I know I'm going very fast, but we will have time to reflect in a minute. So, and then the next actionable insight was acknowledge and shift power dynamics from authentic reciprocity. So we must, we must acknowledge the importance of identifying internal institutional practices to foster capacity for working effectively with diverse communities. And I started to allude to it in the previous actionable insight. And so these really include, committed leadership, diversifying staff at all levels, and paying attention to power dynamics within the organization and within the partners. A huge part of this is understanding and respecting Latino audiences, and what that requires an awareness of these power dynamics within the institution and also in society more broadly, especially during these times right now. Also, a key part of just reducing the power imbalances might involve, really respecting the way people self-identify and or allowing them to decide which cultural markers, such as food, clothing, and holidays, are important to them, rather than making decisions for them based on assumptions, stereotypes, or convenience. So in this particular panel, we also, some of the key points that emerged from here was really to reclaim cultural assets and not allow Columbusing. There's a whole piece on our in our summary report that calls out some of these definitions, so you should check those out if those aren't familiar to you. And to really have honest conversations around commitments, longevity, limitations, and really distribute the leadership meetings with leadership. So if you're meeting with a CBO and their ED is there, your ED should be there too. That shows real commitment to the partnership. And really, create support spaces for people to bring their full selves, as we talked about earlier. And power sharing, the other big piece as well. So the next one is celebrate successes, accept failures, and as part of the process, and work towards organizational change. A while ago, Laura Huerta-Mayes was one of the advisors for this group, and she had done some diversity and inclusion work with us a while ago. And one of the things that she was really clear about is to make sure that you pause and that you celebrate those successes, because this is a long process and a long journey, and it's important to acknowledge those and to celebrate them as they are milestones in our work. The other thing is accept failure. There was a lot of talk about can we fail? If we fail, does that impact the future of our programs or different opportunities? And really, what we're hoping the field starts to take on is really embracing that failure as part of the risk that we do to innovate our work, and to actually be able to move the needle on STEM and STEM. And all of this is about moving towards organizational change. So we came up with a quick little call to action phrase, which is iterate, celebrate, and incorporate. So on that note, I'm going to turn it, I guess we're going to go to questions now to see what questions folks had. And I'm going to switch over to where I can access that. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, are folks thinking about, so we're moving to the next part where we would love to hear what your questions are or reflections, or if there's clarification we could provide. I know that was a whirlwind kind of tour of the information, but I just want to make sure that folks have time to think and to ask their questions. And I'll pause. Okay. Well, while, seems like, Lily, are you sending me things through chat still?
I think we just got 2 questions on the group Zoom chat. So do you want to read them?
So I just want to make sure I'm looking in the right place. Okay. And so if I'm reading this correctly, I think it's next steps for the summit beyond this webinar. It's a really great question. There's a couple of things that we're considering. One is we really hope that folks really use those resources that we've developed, the articles, because those are really deeper dives into the different strands of work. And one of the things that we were hoping we would accomplish through the summit that we weren't quite able to was to actually identify research questions for the field that we then could start to work on collaboratively as a field to try to address. So I would say that that's still a remaining field to do and to reflect on. And then the other thing just to say is that, you know, the Exploratorium wrote this grant and hosted the summit, but this is the work of the field. So our thought is that if others kind of take different aspects of it, and we could cumulatively start to build the field that way as well. The other idea that we're thinking about is that based on the feedback from the summit participants, there was a lot of interest potentially in maybe creating a network that just focused on Latinos and STEM engagement and STEAM engagement. And so we are kind of thinking about what does that mean, who might be interested, and is it viable? So those are the different aspects that we are thinking about currently. So Cal Academy had a question about, we're interested in knowing how you think your insights might apply intersectionally to other diversity initiatives. That's a really interesting question. I think, and by the way, I want to invite my other colleagues to jump into the conversation around responding to this. If you notice, a lot of the themes and a lot of the actionable insights actually have a lot of overlap and parallel regarding other audience segmentations as well. And also, there's a lot of applicability that I think that folks could try to think about, particularly around models and frameworks. So if you were to think about, you know, what does co-creation or co-development look like, you know, when you're engaging multiple audiences, you know, that's kind of a strand or a theme to kind of look at and investigate. I think another key part of this work is also in the amount of effort that we need to put into really understanding different communities, and so basically, and going beyond, you know, just the demographic understanding and profiles, and really doing more segmentation to understand the nuances of culture and identity for the groups, and also just really, because I feel like that's where we're going to turn the corner with audiences.
Yeah, this is Cecilia. Can I just weigh in?
Yes.
So it's Cecilia Garrett. I would say that the great overview that Veronica gave of the GENIAL findings are actually completely applicable. I don't think there are any that are specific to Latino audiences as such. For example, if you're thinking about identity is complex, fluid, about thinking about the intersectionality dimension, all those things apply regardless of Latino audience. So I would say that you could take the GENIAL findings and think about these across audiences. I think where then you would want to nuance by audience is thinking about context and specificity in terms of cultural groups or subgroups, right? So thinking about things like how generation might affect something, or how a particular place or and resources that it might be available in a rural area versus another area. Those might be places that then become really nuanced at a particular audience level for whatever audience you're working with.
Right, yes, thank you. Thank you for chiming in. How much more time do we have for questions?
I think we have to move on.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We're going to turn it over to Lily.
And thank you for those other questions that people added to the chat box. Again, we encourage all of you to email us, and you'll get our team's email at the end of this. And we hope that in the discussion group, some of these questions could be flushed out. And so next, we're going to transition into virtual breakout sessions, where we hope that we are able to translate the actionable insights into 3 ideas that we thought provided a natural arc for progression. So one group is going to be focusing on understanding Latino audiences. Another group is going to be focusing on shifting internal power dynamics. And a third group is going to be focusing on shifting external power dynamics with community partners. And we hope that each breakout discussion group is able to explore these ideas and actionable insights, but also keep in mind the overarching themes of co-creation and risk-taking and iteration.
So our idea was to break out into this group, and the theme around this one is understanding Latino audiences. And so I just want to say, Cecilia led this strand at the summit. And so our idea, so in a way, well, we haven't had a chance to check in. So we're going with this approach. But Cecilia, I totally want you to jump in there and help shape this too. Well, our idea was that that we want to think about these 2 aspects around spend time and resources understanding Latino communities and identities, and use data for analysis, reflection, and action in conjunction with community dialogue. So those 2 aspects under this understanding Latino audiences, and based on what we shared. And we have 3 questions that we want this group to consider and reflect on. So the first one is around situating the work, which is what are you doing currently in these areas? 2 is around a plan around, what do you need next for yourself to kind of push in these areas? And then the third thing is the action part, which is what can you do immediately in your own work to start to push on these areas. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about responding to those. And I think, are they either you could pull up the Google Doc link that we sent. How many of you have that, or did you print it, or do you have a printout?
I have it on the screen.
You have it on the screen? Okay, great.
I have Ashley back. Is it Ashley? To help us with Michelle, but she's asking what the problem is.
Okay.
We're here.
Great. So Ashley, Michelle doesn't have a microphone, and it doesn't, so how can she participate? And we're not sure, and I don't think she can chat either.
Is there any way, Michelle, that you can call in and talk through the phone? Oh, how to communicate.
Are you able to get, you know what, I'll ask her. Ashley. Okay. I send it to her, so we'll see what she says. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, so then that way you could think about responding to those questions. that you either have in front of you or in this chat somewhere. Do you have those?
I'm currently posting them in the chat.
Okay.
Did you see the first two I put up there?
Yes.
Yeah, you know what yes, I think it just splits them out. Okay, so I'll give you about another, yeah, I guess we didn't really start. I'll give you 2 minutes if you haven't already. Thank you for working with us. There's a lot going on. It's a juggle. Okay, little less than a minute. Oh, Michelle, can you hear us now? Okay. All right. So, I forgot to do something very important. I forgot to tell you that I have a partner in this group chat. It is Yvelle. Yvelle is going to attempt very awesomely to synthesize and do a share out when we come back with the whole group about your reflections around what do you need to do next, because one of the things we want to do is to leave this group feeling like, oh, here's what people are thinking, what pieces could I consider doing myself or partner up, or just, we really just want people to take some action is really what it comes down to. So the way we're going to structure this is that we have 15 minutes to share our ideas from these three questions. So I think what I'm going to do, just because for the sake of ease, is maybe just go through in order as you show up on my screen. So that means, Deborah, would you mind going first and telling us about your thoughts about, you know, what you are currently doing, and just as a guideline, maybe like keep it like close to under a minute if possible.
Okay. I'm Deborah Gitlitz, and I am a public librarian. Part of my work is youth services, part of it is community engagement. I came from a large public library system, Multnomah County, which serves the city of Portland, where we were well into having done lots of community analysis, lots of community conversation, and had shifted the staff, the organization culture to hire more and more multilingual and multicultural staff, and the face of the organization is really changing, as is the thinking. Now I work for a standalone city library in the city of Wilsonville that is historically fairly white, with a fairly recent influx of Latino immigrants, among other people, but that's the largest section of newcomers. they hired me to be their community outreach person, and I'm the first speaker of Spanish, and that was inadvertent. It wasn't in the position description. So I've kind of come along saying, hey, let's talk to the Spanish speakers in our community. And it's really, really fresh in this organization. So what I've done so far is I've been able to look at community data, talk to the schools about the data they've gathered. I started attending the Latino family advisory councils in the schools, reaching out to a low-income apartment complex where there happen to be a lot of Spanish speakers, and there's a community center, and we're able to I hang out with them and, you know, chat and get to know people and sort of try to follow up on needs or interests expressed and work with the moms to develop programs together. So doing a microcosmic version of that. I've also been able to go to the Guadalajara Book Fair. This is going to take more than a minute.
You have 8 seconds.
8 seconds to buy Spanish language books for the community based on people's responses. So I'm able to do a fair amount in my little part-time only me position. And let's see, we're starting with where we are. Yeah, okay, that's where I'm starting.
That sounds awesome. So it sounds like you are beginning relationships, getting grounded in the community, and really kind of starting to do a deep dive into the landscape.
Yes, as best I can with tiny little me.
Yeah, well, it always starts with a me.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, Michelle, are you able to, can we hear you now? No. Oh, sad face. Oh, but somehow but I'll send you my answers. Okay. So Michelle, is it okay if are you typing stuff up? I think she's typing things in there. Yeah. Oh, okay. I will be Michelle's voice.
Amplify.
Oh, what's that?
I said, you'll amplify her.
I'll amplify her, that's right. She says, I work for Rocky Mountain National Park, providing environmental education programs for Spanish for families. Yes, thanks, in Spanish. Okay, all right. I don't know if she's adding anything. Oh yeah, need to get feedback from participants about what isn't working. Design a program with local Latinos who are interested in helping. Helping with what, maybe, Michelle? Is there something specific? Oh, helping to design the program. Okay. Okay. All right. Anything else you want to? Topics, themes, times that work for them. Okay. So also kind of in an early phase of kind of working with this. Have you done other work, Michelle, with the Latino audiences around programming, or is this like a new area? I'm assuming she can hear me. Is that true? This is so bizarre. Okay, maybe not. Okay, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move us along. Yvelle, did you want to do a quick sharing?
Sure. So currently I'm at the Fleet Science Center in San Diego, California, where I work as a programs manager. And I guess kind of where I am right now is getting a lay of the land. I think that we have a lot of community-based efforts and a lot of different strategies. And so where I am right now is, because I'm pretty new, I'm trying to learn how to do my job. But then beyond that, try to develop a kind of an addendum to our strategic plan that is more focused on community and with more buy-in from leadership and coming at the table with a proposal or with like an approach or strategy, hopefully move on beyond that point in a more collective and cohesive way.
Okay. Wow, so you're doing like big picture and also focus thinking at the same time.
Yeah, trying to.
Okay.
It's more because I think that the organization in its word really supports community engagement, but I think that currently they're lacking a little bit of the more of that strategy piece and more of that how to. So while they encourage things like failure and risk taking, it's not always clear like how that's going to happen or who's going to take the lead on it when everyone's already really darn stretched. So I think that even wanting to do these kinds of things that I'm talking about, it's not because, I mean, it's part of my own volition, not because anyone's asking me to.
Okay, so that there's always that juggle of the pressure of project and time and resources. Yeah, that's a huge one, I think, for our field in general, so many ways. Okay, so thanks, Yvel. Cecilia, what about you?
Well, I feel like I'm always in this little strange spot, right? As someone who is at an organization that really does consulting for the formal learning field. I guess right now I'd say that one of the things that's really on my mind a lot that isn't even specific to the Latino community, but speaks to a lot of these issues is that as a co-PI of CAISE, we're working on the Broadening Participation Task Force. So we're dealing with a lot of these issues. And I think the pieces that, for me, just I think where my headspace is right now is in these big picture pieces around organizational change and systems pieces. So, you know, I find that there's a tension in this work when I think about something like working with the Latino audiences. I think to Deborah's point is, how do you do it when you're a small organization and yet you're really trying to address these very large systemic level inequities? And so it's just a space that's occupying a lot of currently the work that I'm personally doing, and I think where Garibay Group as an organization is thinking a lot with different science centers and other informal institutions.
That I attended, I think, your broadening participation session at Aztec, and some of the questions that came up around the systemic pieces, and also just like whose point of view is it that's really being, and for what purpose? Those are huge, huge questions, really around how, as a field, we approach the work and these initiatives. And so really, like, I guess I'm just saying, like, there's so much dimensionality and ways of looking at this work, all the way from like a specific program all the way to a systemic kind of infrastructural kind of oppressionistic kind of system, right? So way to go deep, sister. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is big. Okay, can we hear from you, Analia? Am I saying your name right?
You are.
Hi. Hi.
Hello. So I'll be super short since I've just moved to a new organization and I've been here for 6 weeks. So I'm still just kind of figuring out what's going on. But from initial impressions, it seems like there is a lot of really great community work happening and a lot of enthusiasm for that community work, which is always really exciting. And so I think that the biggest next steps for me, in addition to just sort of familiarizing myself with what's happening, is making sure that I'm really thinking about that idea of developing with as opposed to developing for, as I think about the programs that I'm managing. I think that a lot of times the first impulse is that, you know, you develop a program for, and then as you mature in your community programming, you sort of really start to think more about programming with, and I think that's where we are now.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I'm seeing that we have 5 minutes. This was very ambitious. So I think what I want to do is get us to question 2, which is, what do you need in your own work that's going next that will kind of support and push the work forward for you? I think I'm gonna start with, I guess I'll start with Deborah. so we're going order. And yeah, we're going to have to keep it really crisp. Sorry. This was too adventurous, no, ambitious is the word.
It's good. We have to.
Just so you know, we're going to report out on these. Well, Yvelle will report out on these. So Deborah, give us your 30-second pitch.
What do I need? I need to convince management to prepare to hire more multicultural and multilingual staff as occasion arises. But it's a small place that's there's not much turnover. I really need. I don't know. You may have to come back to me. Let me think.
Okay. All right. How about you, Cecilia? What do you need? I know nobody ever asked me that. Everybody asks me.
I don't know. Can you convince the federal agencies that they need to be thinking about funding systemic level work where you don't have, I think seriously though, from a way that we as a field, I think operate, and even the funding reflects this, it's very, very project focused.
Yes.
So it's very much about a particular initiative, a particular, deliverable that's usually, and I'm thinking here very traditionally in terms of programmatic, say, a program you're doing. But when you do that, it's really hard from a funding, from a organizational change and systems approach to really be able to foster relationships and to make the kind of traction that you need. And so it's really interesting to think about how do we move from a sort of thinking about funding and the work we do in these kind of project specific ways of thinking, and even our timelines reflect that, to thinking about our work as something that is much more expansive in time. Not that those particular programs or initiatives aren't useful, but they need to be situated in a much larger way of thinking. And I think there needs to be funding that allows for that kind of larger work where you're attending to issues of equity happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay, so let's see. Can we hear from Analia, please? And then, Yvelle, I'm going to cheat and have you add your stuff at the end so you could represent it in the synthesis, because they're about to, merge us again. So, Analia, can I hear from you, please? And then, Michelle, can you type in yours? I think you already did.
Sure. I think that what I need to do is to have a lot of internal conversations and make sure that, before we move forward with anything or develop a strategy, that everyone sort of from a staff perspective is on the same page or has similar goals or ideas in mind, so that we're sort of moving forward with a sense of cohesion as opposed to a lot of different ideas.
Great. Awesome. Wow, you're very succinct, Analia. Just want to tell you.
I'm doing what I can.
You know what you can. Okay, and then Michelle, okay, it looks like they're going to have us merge. Thank you so much.
We're going to start discussing along these different questions for the next few minutes. And we'll have about 7 minutes to discuss each question. And it looks like we have about 7 or 9 of us as we keep coming in and out. So what we can do is we might have different views of each other on our screen. So I can call out a person, and then if you're ready to share, you can share. And if not, we can pass and then maybe go through that way, just so we give everyone a chance to answer the questions. So the first question is, we talked about, we framed it with the word situate. So we're curious to know, what does it look like currently at your organization to cultivate ownership of the work across every function of the ISL organization, to break down barriers and to prevent assigning diversity work to only a few staff? So first, Alicia, would you like to share anything? And
yeah, sure.
Also, sorry, could you also share where you're from?
Yeah, so my name is Alicia Crawl. I'm with the National Ecological Observatory Network in Boulder, Colorado. So NEON is short, I guess, for where I work. But we're a national observatory funded by the National Science Foundation. I'm not sure how many people on the conversation are familiar with us. But our project, basically, we developed this infrastructure across the United States to collect a lot of data at 81 field sites across the country. And I think in terms of developing the project, we really kind of worked primarily with research universities. I'm fairly new to the project, but we've now built the observatory, and now we're going into what we're calling operations, and we're going to be collecting data at all of these field sites for the next 30 years. And so we're really wanting to look at engaging, doing a better job of engaging underserved communities as to how they might be able to utilize these data sets that we're producing to, look at issues in their community, also to help support data science training to, different audiences and how we might be able to implement that. We actually wrote a grant to the NSF Includes program to host a conference to look at diversity and data science careers. So we're still waiting to hear back on that. But we've tried to start some conversations with some different organizations. Right now, it's mostly our education team that's been working in these areas, but we're trying to take that up to our leadership. And I think there's interest, but we're still at the very early stages of getting some of this looked at as we're transitioning.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Viv, would you like to share anything?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. And I'm not sure how to get my visual up there, but sorry, I'm pretty low tech. I'm just, it occurs to me that we have this sort of work going on in a number of different programs here at the Exploratorium, but they don't always, these different programs don't always speak to each other. So, for example, there might be something going on with the Studio for Public Spaces or with our Global Studios area. There's certainly stuff that goes on with our two different professional development programs. But it happens in my work in community educational engagement. So it's almost just we have to make an effort internally to talk to each other, just to sort of get an overview of what all is happening in our particular institution that might be specific to an institution that is as large as ours, that, the right hand does not know what the left hand's doing, but both hands are actually doing similar kinds of work. So yeah, that's my one thought about it, is just talking more between ourselves.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, you're bringing up some of the real pinch points to doing this, which I think we can get into next for sure. Carol, and it looks like you have a few people. Would you like to share anything?
Well, Mataki, do you want to talk about the Latino initiative?
Yes, hello, Carol and my name is Malia del Carmen Cosu, and I am project director for Latino initiatives at the Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service. So we develop bilingual exhibitions that go around the nation, and we want to explore Latino stories that are part of the American experience. And one of the things that we are trying to do is to connect with our host venues around the country and to learn more about the audiences they serve. And one of the things that CAISE, as it's called our organization, is to create opportunities for each host venue to collect local stories that connect to our exhibitions. For example, we had an experience in Austin, Texas with one of our exhibitions where they created their own little exhibit about the community story that connects with the Smithsonian exhibition, and this was about the braceros the farm workers that came between 42 to 1964 to the United States, when we needed farm workers in the fields around that time when we had the Second World War. And it was amazing to see we learned from our host venues how they created the local stories of these farm workers from Austin, Texas. So we are trying to give avenues to our host venues to involve the community and bring their stories to the main theme of our exhibits.
And so I think that what you see here is the beginnings of taking the Latino initiative throughout the Smithsonian and broadening it to beyond just specific Latino topics, and looking at natural history and our space and astronomy programs in general. And so we're really here to learn from you.
Awesome. Cool.
So we do social history, art, and science exhibits, and we want to make them bilingual. We want to open them to the communities. And we receive a lot of feedback from our host venues as well. Through our survey at the end, we always talk to our exhibitors before, during, and after the exhibition is in their local community. So that's also a helpful tool.
Great. Cool. And I think we've got about 4 people, or I'm not sure. I think someone moved. So we'll keep going, but if just in a few sentences, if you could talk about what you're doing currently in your organization to cross barriers, to break down barriers, and share the work. Jackie Horgan and your team, would you go ahead and unmute, and if you guys want to share anything?
Hi, so I'm Danny Zeiger with the American Museum of Natural History.
We cannot hear.
Sorry. We're with the American Museum of Natural History's Children and Family Learning Division. And at the moment, we have a variety of programs from busing families from public housing on Saturdays into the museum to provide opportunities to the museum, from working with local Head Start communities or Head Start centers that serve largely a Latino population, and providing professional development for those teachers and programming for the children and families from those sites. And at the moment, each of those programs and others are kind of run out of individual departments and individual teams, and we don't have a centralized way of communicating across those teams or understanding ways of serving the communities in more effective ways. That's something that we are working on internally. We also have most of our recruitment and outreach for a lot of these programs is actually done by an outside consultant who doesn't work here in the building. It's another that we don't. The work is not being done here at the institution to begin with, so distributing that work across the institution is more effective for us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Amy Grack-Nelson, would you like to share anything?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that I'm not Amy Grack-Nelson. I'm just using her login information for the account, and she was planning on being part of the conversation, but she wasn't able to make it, unfortunately. So my name is Heber Velasquez, and I'm a evaluation and research associate at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And what we're doing here, I'm fairly new to the organization. I've only been here several weeks. So from what I've seen so far, there's a lot of really interesting initiatives and programs around diversity and equity that are specifically designed to not be owned by a specific department, or for example, it is not solely within the evaluation department that these efforts are being carried out through and promoted, but also to include the entire museum as a whole. And that's some of the things that are going on here at the museum, and that's one of the things that prompted me to specifically look into this webinar in terms of what's going on across the field and what were some of the findings of the summit. But overall, I would say that the activity and programs going on here are specifically designed to carry out those efforts beyond the evaluation department, for example, and across the entire museum.
Cool. And now, Alicia Krull, were you the first person to share also, or have you shared yet?
Yeah, I was the first person.
Okay. Okay. Oh no, and we just lost Alicia Santiago. So right now, the last person is a phone number, 617-512-6870. Do you want to share?
So that number is actually a member of our team. She's just calling in separately.
Oh, okay.
But she's
okay.
in the library right now, so she probably.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, why don't we, let's see, we'll go ahead and move on to the second question, which is where we really want to spend the meeting. It'll probably take up about the rest of our time. So the second question is thinking about where we're all currently at and where our institutions are currently. And some of this, I think, has already come up in what people said at the beginning. But what would you need? What can you imagine would help you take these efforts to the next level? And I don't know if it might be easier for us to popcorn, or if we want to go in order again.
I can go, I guess. So for us, I mentioned before that we are trying to pull together a conference to try to start some of these conversations, but we definitely need to change our institutional culture. Since we're in Boulder, Colorado, I'm not sure if the group's familiar with NC WIT. And let me, it's National Women for Information Technology. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but it's ncwit.org if you want to look into it. But they have developed a lot of resources for engaging underserved communities in IT professions, and they consider data science kind of under that umbrella. So we've been trying to have some conversations with them, and they actually have individuals that can come and talk to our staff about how to implement some cultural change within our institution. So for us, that's kind of like our next steps, but I really think we're still, again, at the beginning stages of trying to develop some really good partnerships to try to determine how we can best, you know, serve the needs of some of these communities. So.
Awesome. Anyone else? Do you have ideas?
Yeah, are we going in order again?
No, go ahead, Dave.
Okay. It's interesting because, again, from the perspective of the Exploratorium, which is a fairly large institution, the programs are in place that collaborate with community organizations, and I think that that's pretty well established here up to a point. For us, I think it's generating larger Latino audiences, a larger segment of our visitorship being Latino. And that has to do with a number of different things. It has to do with marketing to that particular community in its different variances. Like, I'm sorry, you were... Oh, I thought somebody else was commenting on what I was saying. You gals from AMNH, did you have something to say? No. Oh, no, the Smithsonian, excuse me. Were you also chiming in on marketing, or?
Yes, we would be happy to. We were actually both starting coughing fits, and so I'm sorry. That was what the body language was about. Okay. But I agree with you completely, and I think it's an interesting chicken-egg issue. All of our institutions are driven by audience, but if we don't provide specific opportunities for Latino communities to feel welcome, then we're not going to build the trust that's necessary. And so I think that that's why the GENIAL Summit has been so helpful. to raise that awareness. If we could have, speaking from the Smithsonian, if we could have more institutions such as yours and other natural history museums asking us to provide appropriate resources, simple things like ensuring that all of our exhibitions are bilingual, because that's what is being requested, knowing what we know about bilingual audiences and the code switching that's done. That would provide us with a lot more ammunition to our administration to say that this isn't something that should simply be a one-off, but it should be something that we embed just as we do with other aspects of reaching various other communities.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you don't want to ghettoize programming, you want to homogenize really the audiences at our institutions, instead of just saying, oh, you've got, you know, well, you have now some Latino programming, and now you have some African American programming, and now you have some elder programming, and, you know, whatever it might be. So it's really, it's marketing balanced with an understanding that for us, certainly, it's expensive to come here. So you're not getting to a certain portion of the Latino audiences. But I know, for example, that at our institution, there's been a lot of research done into young adult audiences, and Latino or otherwise, and what kinds of programming might entice them here. But it's kind of looking at things, I think, across the board. And, you know, we do have a couple of days during the year. Again, it might be sort of, sorry to use the term again, ghettoizing programming, but certainly for Mother's Day, it's a free day, and we market that very, very heavily to families in the Latino community. And I don't mean to say that it has to be free, but it's sort of just in an urban environment. If you're dealing with families in general, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, regardless of what culture they identify with, what ethnicity, you know, it's expensive to come here. And also our annual engineering day is a free day for specifically invited audiences from the Latino community, and that also is a free day. So anyway, marketing, that was my main point.
Yeah, that's great. And we probably, I made a mistake. I want to call out something, and we probably have time for one or two more quick things, but sitting next to me is Megan, and I forgot to introduce ourselves. I'm Amy, this is Megan. I'm facilitating the conversation, but probably in 1 minute or so, we're going to go back into the main meeting room, and Megan's going to report out to the rest of the group about our conversation.
Okay.
So we do have 1 minute now. So let's see, from anyone else, do you have anything to share as far as what would help, or what do you see as the next step to better work across your organization to deal with power differentials?
I believe Veronica talked about intersectionality, and I think that's a very important point to remember. Carol and I were talking about a science exhibit on boreal forest that hopefully will get developed soon, and we were talking about how Latinos can perceive this exhibition on boreal forest, and we started to make connections to people from South America, the cosmovision, different languages spoken, art about boreal forest, etc. So, so different subjects and how we can attract and make connections to our audiences.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we have about 30 seconds. So any last ideas on what resources or what steps you might take next?
This is Danny from AMNH. I would just say having the resources that you guys are producing for GENIAL is going to go a long way towards helping us convince our larger administration at this institution that we need to have more of an institutional initiative to better serve our local communities than we currently.
we've found if that's a really important part of our proposals to be successful. So it's not really an option to ignore your partners. And if they're going to partner with you, if you're partnering with them, they need to share in developing the concepts and in developing the plan implementation, developing the evaluation component. So it really is, it's not a, we know what we're doing and how to do it, and you guys we're gonna tell you how to do it at all. You can't do that. Funders are not gonna fund that attitude either, because that attitude will come out in the writing if that's the attitude of the writer. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Cheryl. Do other folks have examples of work going on in their institution that they want to share?
So we're in the process of developing a new exhibit, and it'll be the first exhibit for us that's going to be multilingual in English and 3 additional languages, and in figuring out how to manage that interpretation. We've been doing audience testing with people who are bilingual, or we weren't able to speak to anyone who was not English speakers because we didn't have translators available. Oh, we did? Yeah. Oh, okay, take it back. I didn't. But so I was thinking about that as, obviously one of the languages we're working with is Spanish, and we were talking to people who are, Spanish, English, bilingual, and who potentially have family members who might come who don't speak English or whose preferred language would be Spanish. So I think that's the thing that immediately that I thought of where, in our exhibits work that we've been directly sort of partnering with communities. But one thing that I thought was interesting that you guys brought up earlier in the actual insights is the idea of interpreting the data with the community, which we didn't really do that, to my knowledge. I mean, we interpreted as a team. And one thing I'm thinking about in terms of like where we are and what to do the next level is, we sometimes the people who come and give feedback have some experience sort of thinking about the kind of challenges that we have to think about as people developing exhibits, but not everybody is sort of specialized. So I'm thinking about how we would meaningfully do a sort of collaboration in terms of interpreting the data without assuming that you come with the specialized knowledge that we do about creating exhibits, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. Do other folks have experience with that or advice?
Oh, yes, this is Amparo Lehman Pino again. We have had the chance, I have worked also in Mexico with the Children's Museum Paparote, which is where I started my career. And we have a children's council, and with the children's council, we used to co-create a lot of exhibits. And there were children from the community. Mexico is a very stratified society, so we try to make the council very balanced in the terms of children coming along. And it was a lot of buy-in from the parents to allow their children to be part of it. But the whole renovation, the first renovation of the Children's Museum was made with ideas from the children, which was really valuable. And in another work that I have done in family engagement in the Bay Area, working with schools and partner with the parents, we use the pretext of a leadership workshop with parents to create community engagement, and therefore with them we've had the opportunity to co-create things, and with that community I had the chance to build citizen scientist projects for Cornell University and the Palo Alto Children's Museum and Zoo. And it's like one project builds to the other, and then therefore you're kind of training your community to be open to say their opinions, to be open to give their ideas, and in the future be very comfortable to provide ideas for your exhibits or programs.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, for that response. Do we have someone else that wants to share an experience or some work that they're currently doing before we move on to question 2? Okay. Clearly we're all at different stages of doing this work. And thinking about where we are now and where your institution is now, what do you think you would need to take these efforts to a next level? What kind of questions do folks have?
This is Amparo again. In my case, I'm building some projects with the Desert Botanical Gardens in Arizona. And my first step was to bring my client to the GENIAL Summit last summer. And it was a perfect first step because now we're talking in the same terms. And she is in the webinar today in some other room or group. So for me, that was a good way to evangelize, in a way speaking, but also it's a little bit of training my own clients or the people I work with these findings and others. For example, the Berry report is another way to invite people to open their minds and their hearts for a new perspective on engaging diverse audiences.
Thank you. Ray, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say that I think where we are at here at Lincoln Park, so I think that since we are working within community, specifically dedicated to community with no end in sight, I think the next steps would be to build and diversify the team representing these specific communities that we are engaging with. And then also to be able to apply these opportunities to local community leadership with or lacking of formal training or education as it may be. Even though we are an informal institution, we do feel that there is underrepresentation of color. For example, in my case, out of 42 educators, there's only 2 people of color, only 2 Spanish speakers, and only 1 that is capable of doing translation that is actually the community engagement person and nothing else.
I'm sorry, I missed the part about leadership in the community. I think I heard you say that obviously we need representation on the project team and folks doing this work, and that we need to provide the leadership within the organization. Was there a point about the external group?
Yeah, definitely. I think that we have been able, through our work, we have been able to identify a lot of good leadership and a lot of good skill sets and facilitation of these programs and common core goals that are collaborating with us and co-creating with us in our programming. I think that, by bringing or extending one of those branches into the community members directly and saying, hey, we see you having a place here at our institution, and it's not just us coming over and visiting La Villita or, coming over and doing like a summer pop-up thing.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Other folks, what would you need to take the next step in your current work?
Well, I think for the multilingual exhibit development that we're currently pursuing at the Academy, there's a lot of next steps to consider because this is the first time we're doing this work. But I think once we have all of the interpretive material out on the public floor, being able to talk to our audience and actually see if what we deduced as what would work well is actually working for our audiences that we're trying to serve. So doing definitely some summative evaluation work. And Amparo's been a partner with us on this project, and something that we've been talking about as well, and I know some other institutions have this, but is creating a glossary of terms that we'll be able to use for future exhibits and actually across departments. And
that's where I definitely see like co-creation coming into play. And for future writing projects as well, if we can do more of the co-writing rather than just having the text written in one language and then translated and then reviewed and vetted, but actually doing co-writing in multiple languages, I think would be a really awesome opportunity.
And help me understand, what is the glossary of terms? Like language for internal use so people understand the approach you're taking, or is it like language for exhibit development?
More for the consistency of exhibit writing. So having sort of a style guide of some sort where we know that certain terms are going to be understood by certain groups of people in the way that we intend. There's obviously a lot of nuance in the way that languages can be translated and just nuance within culture. And so we just want to make sure that we're providing sort of that consistent experience when it comes to reading our exhibit labels.
And if I might add, is you, Tamara, you were talking? Because it says writer DS on the screen.
Yeah.
Also with the glossary, with the Cal Academy. Awesome. Also with the glossary, it impacts other practices within the institution, like marketing. And marketing is the voice of the institutions to the community directly. So whatever we have agreed upon in the exhibits department for these multilingual exhibits will impact in other departments like education or marketing, etc., in the way that we address and we talk and we connect with the community. And also the glossary will set the tone that whatever voice we have in the original language, in this case English, will be translated in the same way to other languages with the same emphasis and the same familiarity. I've been working with other institutions. When they translate into Spanish, they became very formal and they talk to the community with the formal way, and people is like, oh my God, maybe it's not for me, right? It's not the right tone. So that's sort of the things that we've been like fine tuning with the Cal Academy, and I'm very pleased to be part of the project.
Lovely. I know that something that I've been thinking a lot about, because the Exploratorium is such a huge agency, when we talk about co-creation and we want to incorporate that into all of our work, so it's not only about co-creation of the exhibit, we really also want to co-create the exhibit labels and the graphics and the messaging in the community. And this goes to Ampara's point that obviously you have to do all that work internally first to make sure that stakeholders are on board. And then I'm really curious about, and then how do you engage, to what end do you engage the community group in helping you and in them taking ownership of all those other collateral and all of that knowledge creation that they can help you facilitate and or bring to the table. Cheryl, do you have...
Sí, sus papás son dueños de Alálimo. Ella trabaja con otra mamá de Pepe.
Some people need to mute their microphone, sorry.
Hey, folks.
Estamos por mi oficina en Guaynabo. Eso es Glenda H.
Okay or not. You can just talk over them. Do folks have any miles or experience in doing that kind of work and folding in community agencies and thinking about all components of a project? Maybe some folks we haven't heard from. Alicia Torres or Cheryl. Okay. Do folks have other, Cheryl, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, one thing I was going to say is you have the power, I think, there to mute everybody if you want to.
You're right. Thank you. Let me find that person and mute them. Thank you. Boom. Solved.
I'm remembering a project we did a few years ago that definitely involved bringing co-creation with community members. And it not only made it a better exhibit, but it also made it more, it made it easier to promote it because people in the community, organizations had been involved in developing it, and they wanted to invite their constituents, their audiences, their families and friends.
Right.
So it had a bottom line benefit, which I think, you know, that's a really big issue for our organization and for most, if not all, museums and other organizations. You spend all this time and energy developing programs or exhibits, and you want people to be there to enjoy them. Right. So by bringing people in from the very beginning, it really helps you jumpstart that marketing component, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I think that our time is up. I encourage everyone to think about the third prompt outside of this discussion, and I think that I will be reporting back out to the larger group, but feel free to chime in. I'm going to talk the things that I've heard is obviously this takes a lot of internal work, and whether it's before or at the same time, there's a lot of shifting that has to happen internally. You know, helping share the GENIAL Summit results and involving people in this work helps them get on board. That we need to have diversified teams that reflect the communities that we're working with, that we want to talk to audiences and include them in the evaluation and the interpretation of data, and that things like creating glossary of terms or getting them to getting communities to support the work and co-creating goals for the project have endless results. All that vary from the bottom line and outreach.
All right, everyone is back hopefully from their discussions. And yep, I got an okay. So what we're going to do now is hear from each of the three groups about what came up in your discussions around the framing idea and the different insights that you were tasked with. So first we're going to hear from Yvel about what group one talked about as far as understanding Latino audiences. So Yvel, if you're not already, go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to share.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a very quick, fast, and dirty discussion. So I'm going to do the best I can in terms of relaying all that was said. Really, there was sort of a sentiment of where to go from here is kind of was all over the place. One of the things that came up was convincing management to hire more staff that reflects community members. So kind of like having that built-in kind of member check right at your institution. A very much higher level thing that came up was thinking about how funding can support more of the systemic work that should occur. So how do you go beyond the grant or beyond the project or beyond the program and think more about how the larger institution and those communication systems are affected. Having more internal communications and conversations with staff to make sure that everyone is moving forward at the same pace towards the same goals. And then this notion of having more bandwidth and giving staff more space to think through what it really takes to make this change happen and to understand Latino audiences and to have more accountability around what progress looks like and when progress is being made, you know, just kind of like what those milestones are. So that was very fast.
That's awesome. Those are all things that can be fleshed out as far as how to action on them. So thank you. So from group two, we talked about shifting internal power dynamics within the ISL institution. And Megan, will you share some of the highlights from that conversation?
Absolutely. So like Yvel said, this was actually a very fast conversation, but some of the things that we were, or that was discussed in our group were that we would like to have a centralized way of communicating for larger organizations that have kind of separate efforts within their institution to continue the communication to kind of figure out where everybody is in terms of progress and what each group is doing, as opposed to, because everybody has separate efforts to in increase engagement. We also talked about that initiatives are not owned by a specific department, and kind of breaking that up and including the museum as a whole or the institution as a whole, so that everybody is designed and prepared to carry out the initiatives. We also discussed how kind of in the beginning stages, it's, you know, of implementing or implementation, that there has to be kind of an alliance to, you know, with partner organizations and outside organizations to kind of begin the stages of implementing some of these changes, that we also need to modify programming to entice Latino communities specifically so that our marketing efforts are reaching them. And also that we are focusing on our connections to the audiences. And that this conference and this information that's being shared right now is actually really good to increase administrative support within each of our institutions and organizations to kind of continue moving farther in this direction to increasing Latino visitorship, etc. That's it.
Thank you. And from group 3, shifting external power dynamics with community partners, Lily, would you like to share?
Sure. So for us, we first, of course, acknowledge that all 3 of these discussions, understanding Latino audiences, shifting internal power structures, and shifting external power structures, these efforts don't happen in silos. They probably don't happen in a linear sequence. It's not like, check 1, understand Latino audiences. Check 2, work internally. And that it's a process that probably cycles through iterations of attempting to do all of this work all at the same time. And so starting there, we acknowledge that doing that internal work is a huge component of being able to articulate, engage community partners in a way that's authentic. And that one of the ways that someone had been able to start this work is to really talk to their partners about the GENIAL work, which is a good tip. Get them involved to the work that we're doing. And then maybe there's a shared understanding of what the process could look like. And of course, we also talked about the importance of having project staff that reflect the communities that we're working with and the need to have diverse staff. And also identifying leadership in the community partners and engaging them and inviting them and encouraging them to take the space of leadership in the project. And someone said that they want to convey the idea that we see you having a place here, and that's an important value to be able to project to the community partner. And of course, the importance of engaging partners in all aspects of the work and all aspects of the project, and that co-creation isn't just about one particular component of a project or even executing a project, but that also when you're writing grants, it's important and valuable to include partners in the co-creation of project goals and the co-creation of envisioning what this work could look like. And that a good example of that was maybe for projects creating glossary of terms. One particular organization created a glossary of terms to be used across many projects so that everyone could be on the same page. And so inviting partners to do that kind of co-creation and thinking with you. And acknowledging that, you know, for all the reasons we all know, inviting partners and creating the space to share power and to shift power from internal organizational decision making to partnerships, true partnerships, has many, many bottom lines.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, like Lily opened up saying, it was interesting that I heard some of the things that came out of group 1 were things about group 2, and what group 2 talked about were things that maybe were in group 1, and I did hear a lot of the same things across all 3 groups, which I think speaks to that idea that this work is extremely interconnected, and we do need to share it and be thinking about all of it at the same time. And overall, some of the things I heard from that report out were just about how communication is really key, whether it's between internal programs and sharing about the work we're doing, or whether it's communicating and having honest conversations, and that's part of sharing power with our partners, and or whether it's communicating about the documentation and taking these findings and sharing them more widely with our internal folks. So yeah, we have a lot to do, but hopefully these short discussions have sparked us with small ideas of where we can start with this work. So I think we actually we're probably a little bit ahead of schedule. And so we might have a bit more time for some questions and answers. So if there's more that's been ruminating from the discussion, we may be able to take those. Veronica, are you?
Could I? Oh. This is Alicia Torres. I'm sorry I haven't spoken yet, but I'm a little under the weather here at home, but I've been listening. And I wanted to share with you guys, I work at an institute called Child Trends, and there we have an institute, the Hispanic Institute, and we've been, among the things we've been doing there, one of the projects that I was working on was doing research among Latino families to see how focus groups throughout the country, to see how they prefer to be communicated with. And we came up with a guide. We ended up developing a guide on how to reach and effectively engage Latino families. So we did a literature review and looked at all, kind of where do we know about where Latinos get their information based on research that's out there. What are the kinds of things Latinos are most interested in finding out about? We then conducted a series of focus groups, and in those focus groups, we really tried to delve a little bit deeper into, what do people really want to be called, right? I mean, do Latinos want to be called Latinos? Do they want to be called Hispanics? Who wants to be called? Or, we found it was interesting because we did find that most people prefer to be called by their country of origins. So it's or their country of heritage. So, but in any case, we came up with a guide, and it's called, it's available on the web if you're interested in it at all.
Do you have a link that you could put into the chat?
I could. Yes, I could. Yes, I could.
That'd be awesome. Then everyone
Sure.
can see it.
Sure,
Cool.
I could do that. Yeah. Anyway, I just thought it might be of interest to the group.
That's great. So I can't see anyone or anything. So, but I seem to be in the driver's seat right now. I don't know if we want to take more questions, or if Veronica wants to.
I just unmuted myself. Okay. Were there any other thoughts or questions about? And I just want to say thank you for working with us. This was an experimental kind of approach to trying to have dialogue. And so yeah, we're trying some new things out. Is there any other questions that folks wanted to think about together or pose? I could also go back and try to see what the previous question was. Okay. And feel free to use your chat. Oh, 2 new messages. Awesome. Okay. Coming around the bend. Oh, okay. Let's see. Somebody had a question, but they're trying to figure out how to do it. Oh, is somebody talking?
No.
Oh, okay. It sounds like something.
I did have a question about the sort of desire for more of a network. Do you have any more like information about like why that came up, or how it might be envisioned, or just I was curious about that piece because I think that really resonates with me, and so I wanted to like learn more about what the potentiality could be for something like that.
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, it came up in our summit survey findings, and for the people that participated in the summit, the 91 people, there was quite a bit of interest, and it looked like, just at a basic level of what people were talking about, it was really about being a network in the community of support, and also potentially doing some professional development as well. And so that was what emerged from people's interest. We are going to be looking at that further in a follow-up survey, and we were also actually thinking about surveying the field through Aztec to get a sense around interest and different areas of interest, and just even get a sense of what people are wanting. So that's kind of that's the sketch of the idea. So obviously nascent interest, but we need to learn a lot more about people's interests. So let's see. Deborah had a question for us, and it says, I believe in the power of efficacy of building long-term relationships, definitely, but one piece of my work is helping support / inspire tiny libraries with 2 staff people to do the very beginning baby steps in connecting with the various Latino folks in their communities. Do you have insights from the summit about the best ways for small organizations to take smaller but still effective beginning steps? That is a really great question. In the summit, we actually decided not to focus on best practices, because we wanted to start the conversation at a different place, which is like, based on what we've done, how can we move the field forward in those different 5 strands of work that we talked about. But what we did produce, and if you go to the GENIAL website, you will see a list of resources, readings, all on the different topics, and there's more information there around best practices, and also information around tools that people can use, and it references some model projects. Also, we did not do a field-wide lit review. It was more of an assembly of work that we knew of. So I think that would probably be a great place for you, Deborah, to kind of start to do a deeper dive. And I believe you're going to find some resources there that will be helpful to you.
Can I pipe in, Veronica? This is Vivian.
Yeah. Hey, Viv.
Hi. So we work here at the Exploratorium and have for many years with a professional organization, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And I know they have branches all over the United States, but there are probably other professional organizations that have, maybe they're specifically Latino professional organizations, where you can almost utilize them. I know, for example, our Latino Audience Coordinating Committee has gotten together with a library branch just so far in discussion with one of the library branches in one of our Spanish-speaking neighborhoods about having some folks from this professional organization potentially go there and do a panel discussion for some of the young adult audience members there who are interested in going into the engineering field, for example. So that might be one thing, just to try and look up other professional organizations in your area that have a lot of Latino members that are interested in doing some programming for Latino, just be like a liaison. And also recently, I'm sorry, I'm going to take up a little more time. Veronica knows I'm a chatty gal. Recently with Isabel Hawkins, who's not part of this today, but who was the PI on the GENIAL grant, we did a family science night at a school here that actually has half the population. It's in a fairly upscale neighborhood. Half the population is immediate from the neighborhood, and the other half of the population is from is bussed in from our predominantly Latino populated neighborhood, the Mission. And we did the program in Spanish, much to the consternation of a bunch of the people who didn't speak Spanish, too bad. And it was on this suspension bridge in Peru that has lasted for I don't know how long, hundreds of years or something like that. And we did a lot of activities that were very engaging after the discussion that you gave, after the talk that you gave, just on testing out bridges. And it kind of drew everybody in. It also very specifically brought a couple of the families who are normally bussed into that school who are Peruvian. And there was just something about highlighting those families in, you know, the entire school. Anyway, there are so many different areas. I think that you could look to astronomy also very specifically that has its basis in some ancient Hispanic cultures, and maybe to try and do some programming around that at some of the library branches where you could do some hands-on activities too.
Right. I believe, I'm pretty sure that Isabel referenced the engineering and bridge making. I'm pretty sure that's in the resource list. So thanks for the suggestions. And I see that others have added also in the chat box some additional ideas for you, Deborah, to take a look at. Okay, so we're going to wrap up now the webinar. And so we just wanted to once again say that thank you again for your participation and for being patient with us in our experiment of doing side chats and conversations. I think we have ways to kind of tighten it up going forward. But also, we just wanted to remind you that all the resources, the summit, summary of findings, the detailed proceedings, all these things that you see right here, the articles that were written by the strand leaders and some of the panelists are there, resources. We really are trying to encourage broad dissemination of this work, so then multiple people get access to it as well. And then let's see if we can switch to the next slide. You know, this work really was a labor of love of some really amazing advisors who partnered with us. And Amy had mentioned them in the beginning, but I just want to make sure to highlight them again in their participation. They really help shape and looking and reflecting on what those strands were about, helping to shape the format of the summit, and also helping to reflect on kind of like what is the future, or what are some of those actionable pieces going in the future. So I just want to give a big shout out to the advisors and the coordinating team who just really went over and beyond. I think the last thing also that I just want to say about this work is that, you know, all of this work is really about organizational change. And so no matter if you're looking at it from, I'm just beginning, I have a project, or I'm in charge of an initiative, or how am I looking at audiences and diversity and inclusion in a systemic kind of way, there's just such a range of work that needs to be done in this area. And so our hope is that this information kind of gives you perspective and reflection, and also encourages you to take that and build from wherever you are in your organization, your role, your influence that you lead from where you are and really push this work further. Next slide, please. I also just want to thank, this is a National Science Foundation grant that we received, so thank you to NSF and continuing to support this work. If you have any additional ideas or thoughts that you want to share with us, please do so at the genial@exploratorium.edu link for us, and we will make sure to get back to you. And also, occasionally we will be updating the resources page, so we will continue to add things as we're able to. And then last but not least, thank you to our amazing partners and synthesizers who helped us out today and were part of this experiment. And a huge thank you to CAISE and Aztec for being willing to go there with us and try this platform out. And I don't know if Aztec or CAISE wants to take us home, as they say, or wrap it up.
Yes. Thank you, Veronica. So thank you all for watching today. And if you want to do this again, or if you have a colleague that you think might enjoy going through this webinar, we are going to have a second one hosted through Aztec, the Association of Science Technology Centers, on April 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So mark your calendars. Thank you, everyone.